welcome to episode 3 of Autism Family Life, bringing you all things autism, family, and life in 30 minutes or less. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about something that I was kind of reluctant to even put on my blog, just because it was one of those things that I struggled with internally. And then I came to realize, well, you know what? If I'm struggling with this stuff, then chances are likely that someone else might be struggling with that as well. And the one thing I want to talk to you today about is a lie that I used to tell myself and several other lies. The top, first, foremost lie being that my autistic child ruined my life. And I, looking back on it, it was one of those things that, once again, I was very reluctant to put on my blog. I was reluctant to put it out there just because it was something that I had to come to terms with myself. And, I feel ashamed now that it's coming out and that it's coming to surface. But at the same time, it was one of those things that I really had to be able to get out of my head um, in order to be fully transparent with my audience on my blog, and now to be fully transparent with my audience here on the podcast, wherever it is that you may be listening from, if it's on Stitcher, on Spotify, on iTunes, or on Google Play, or if you are watching with me on YouTube. And, it was just one of those conversations that I really did have to have. And I'll be honest with you too, this was one of those conversations that I probably had with my cat first, because my cat, she's just there. She listens to me. Does she talk back? Of course not. But she listens to me kind of without judgment. So I know, and it sounds odd, but I have those conversations with my cat, and then I get to have them on my blog after I get all of the words out of my head. So bear with me. Um, this is my story of coming to terms with this big lie that I used to believe about my autistic child ruining my life. And this started pretty much after my daughter's autism diagnosis. I talk about this a lot on my blog, and I will talk about it in a couple of episodes coming up. But it was just, coming to the reconciliation with all of the emotions and all the feelings that I was going through after my daughter's diagnosis. And I honestly did not know that I was probably capable of going through all of these different things until my daughter's diagnosis. And I went through a lot. There was a lot of times that I was very angry at the world in general, where I questioned God and where I was just looking for anybody to blame. And I also cried quite a bit. Um, I'm a very emotional person to begin with. Um, I've come to identify myself as both an INFJ and as an HSP, or a highly sensitive person. I have an empathic personality, and because of that, I'm a sympathy crier. So usually when people start crying, I will start crying as well. But I am a very emotionally driven person when I allow myself to be an emotionally driven person, which is about, I don't know, maybe like 45% of the time now. Otherwise, I'm a pretty, rational and logical person. But uh, to give you all the background information about that without fully delving into it, because I do want to go into it on another episode, um, I have a history of clinical depression, or major depression as it's called now, um, or unipolar depression. I have, well, we'll say it's an unofficial anxiety diagnosis of a generalized anxiety disorder. Um, I have been medication free though for quite some time, but I also fully admit, if I need to go back on medication, I'm fully okay with doing that as well. So I tell you all that to kind of bring you to the place where I was when my daughter got diagnosed. At that time, I was in my very early 20s, and I was already a teenage mom. well, not at, by this time I was not a teenager anymore, but I'd already had my first child. Um, was a stay-at-home mom, and getting used to all of that was just kind of like, okay, this is my new identity now, and this is my life. And then I had my daughter, and she was born, it's like almost a month and a half premature. Because of that, and with where we live, she was put under early childhood intervention services. So they were watching her development pretty closely, and um, she was receiving occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, and she had not yet started receiving the special education services at home. But her service coordinator would come in quite often just to kind of check up on us. And I'm pretty sure it was her physical therapist, who had also been my son's physical therapist, who talked to us about the possibility of our daughter being on the autism spectrum. And prior to that, I hadn't really encountered anyone with autism, so I wasn't quite sure what to expect. Um, but I was trying to take everything in stride, and then it finally got to the point where she was just not. She started regressing. Her speech was already delayed, but we were expecting that because of her prematurity. And so there were already a few things, that we were aware of that was kind of like the red flags that, you know, looking back now, okay, so maybe it was a little bit more obvious. Um, but then it just, she started, like I said, she started regressing. And my daughter had a pretty limited vocabulary to begin with. She could say bubbles, she could say bottle, and she could say mom. Uh, so when she started to lose that, it hit me. It hit me really hard, because she had this limited vocabulary already, and mom was one of the three words that she could say, and then she just lost the ability to do so, and I was already pretty devastated by that. So when we finally, went to go get her official diagnosis, her evaluation at the developmental pediatrician's office, I can't tell you what I was wearing, but I can tell you how it felt that day. Um, Going into the office, sitting down and watching as my daughter was going through the evaluation process, and it was like watching the developmental pediatrician watching her, and then watching my daughter going through some of the testing, even as informal as it was. And then when she would get frustrated, she'd come to me, because I was, and I still am, um, one of her biggest sources of comfort. And she used to sit on my lap, and she would play with my hair. Uh, my hair was like her security blanket. And so I remember, all of that, and her coming over and sitting in my lap, kind of for her comfort areas. And when she would get mad, when she would get frustrated, like she'd come over, and sometimes she wouldn't hit, but she would bite me, because again, I was her source of comfort. And so in those first couple of days, first couple of weeks, first couple of months, really after the diagnosis, I was a mess. I was an emotional wreck. And I had a very hard time coming to terms with everything. I had a very hard time coping, um, until I finally just started shutting myself down. I shut myself off, and I started disconnecting from a lot of things, which, double-edged sword, because on one hand, I wasn't letting myself feel, and I probably should have been. But on the other hand, I had to do what I had to do to kind of get my life back together and get my life back on track. Um, so that way I could start being more of the mom that my kids needed me to be. And I went into research mode. I went into full on research mode because that's one of the ways that I cope. I pour myself into finding things out. And I tell you all of that just to say we all deal with these things on our own terms. And, if you are feeling all of these things, then allow yourself to feel them. Because if you don't, then you're just going to end up in a worse place. Um, so, I used to say to myself that my autistic child ruined my life. And I used to say that it was because of the autism that my mental health got so much worse. And it was really, really bad. Um, I was functioning, I wasn't really, I was existing and I was functioning as best I could, um, to doing, what I had to do. And, but I was blaming my daughter's autism just for so many things. When really I kind of had to look at myself, and it was a lot of introspection and a lot of responsibility and a lot of just coming to terms and reconciling the fact that I was not dealing with this how I should have been. Um, and I was just so angry with a lot of things. And I think the biggest thing for me was that I was angry at myself because I didn't know how to handle it. So, but once I realized that the thing that needed to change was me and that it was my mindset that needed to change, everything else started to fall into place. And, I'm not going to lie, there's still some pretty bad days for me. Um, Depression just doesn't go away, anxiety just doesn't go away. And I still have times, um, where just everything just does really, it gets to me. And part of it's because I still haven't fully come to terms with everything. Um, and it's not that I haven't come to terms with her diagnosis. I've come to terms with the diagnosis. I've come to terms with the fact that she is more than likely never going to speak. Um, but I'm still, you know, I still worry about a great deal of things. And there are a lot of things that are probably out of my control. And that drives me up the wall because I want to be able to predict things. I want to be able to know. I want to know that my daughter is going to be taken care of. And that uncertainty just, it brings up a lot of pain. Um, and it's just, some days it's enough that it will get me stuck in this loop of the what ifs and the hypotheticals. And sometimes I have a very hard time coming back from that. Um, some days are better, and then some days are just not great, and that's just how it is. And I've come to terms with that as well. Um, I'm learning. I'm developing my own coping strategies, the blog, and this podcast, and being one of them. It was just being able to talk about it and being able to get these things out of my head, and being able to find people that get it, um, or who understand, or who at least can validate to me that yeah, what you're feeling is real. um, that meant a lot. And I hope that by sharing my own story and by sharing bits and pieces of my life and bits and pieces of my family's life, that someone else is, who might be listening, can say, okay, so there is someone else who feels this way. Or they can say, okay, so there is someone else who's struggling with the same things that I'm struggling with. And that was a main reason behind sharing this story, behind my starting this, and by getting into what I'm doing. And that is the main reason for, kind of peeling back some of the layers. Um, just because I'll be the first to admit that I hate it, kind of like exposing myself like this. Um, I hate being in a vulnerable position. But then I had to realize, I was like, well, wait a minute. If I'm feeling this way, someone else is probably feeling this way. And if I can overcome these things, or at least begin to overcome these things, then maybe I can help spread that message to someone else that yes, you can overcome these things too. And yes, you will overcome these things too. Even if it may not seem like it right now, eventually you will get to a place where you can. So, with that in mind, and I want to bring this episode to an end. Like I said at the beginning, my goal for Autism Family Life is to bring you autism, family, and life in 30 minutes or less because I know that your time is precious. So I will talk to you guys again soon. And until then, I hope that you have an amazing day.